Right now, India is preparing to bulldoze nearly 1 million trees on a remote island to create a strategic outpost designed with China in mind. This is Great Nicobar. It's an island so remote it sits closer to Indonesia than to mainland India, and it's home to one of the last truly isolated tribes on Earth. The official story from New Delhi is economic development, a new global shipping hub. But behind the economic language, this is really about power. Which begs the question, why is the world's largest democracy rushing to transform a remote, seismically active island into a massive new strategic hub, while risking one of the last intact ecosystems in the Indian Ocean and the survival of an isolated tribe? I wanted to understand why India would invest so heavily in such a remote and contested location. So I started pulling on the geography. Great Nicobar Island sits at the very southern tip of India's Andaman and Nicobar archipelago, a 700-kilometre chain of islands that military planners have long called a natural aircraft carrier in the mouth of the Strait of Malacca. That strait is one of the most important waterways on Earth. More than a quarter of all global trade passes through it. And here's the number that keeps Beijing awake at night. Around 3/4 of China's imported crude oil transits those same waters. The island's southern tip lies just 150 kilometres from the western entrance of the strait. Chinese naval vessels and oil tankers moving between the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean pass close enough to make the island highly consequential. For decades, India barely used this geographic advantage. Then China began its Belt and Road ports, Hambantota, Gwadar, Kyaukphyu, the so-called String of Pearls. In 2021, India's Niti Aayog responded with a master plan to transform the island. An international container terminal at Galathea Bay, a new airport, a 450-megawatt power plant, and a township eventually planned for 350,000 people. On paper, it's an economic project. In reality, it's India's response to decades of expanding Chinese influence across the Indian Ocean. And for a while, that explanation made sense. Then I started looking at what they were actually building. Because the project isn't just about military positioning, it's three forces colliding at once. When you read the official project documents, the language is carefully sanitized. Holistic development, maritime connectivity, reducing dependence on foreign ports. But read what defense analysts are saying on the record and a different picture emerges. Harsh Pant, vice president at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi, told Military Times that Great Nicobar is, quote, a permanent forward base for military power projection. The proposed airport, officially civilian, would handle fighter jets and surveillance aircraft. The new port infrastructure extends India's naval reach deep into the eastern Indian Ocean, and every Chinese vessel moving through the 6-degree channel would do so within range of India's monitoring network. And that capability matters more right now than it ever has. When the US-Iran-Israel conflict disrupted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, the world got a sudden reminder of how quickly a maritime choke point can become a weapon. India watched that happen and accelerated. Great Nicobar is their answer to the question, what if it happens here next? What the engineers aren't telling you is this. The port at Galathea Bay is not primarily designed to make India rich. It's designed to make China nervous. The commercial development is the cover story that makes the military build-up diplomatically digestible. But even that isn't the most controversial part of what's happening here. Because on the island itself, the consequences are far more immediate and far more irreversible. Galathea Bay is where India plans to build its massive transshipment port. It also happens to be one of the most significant nesting sites on the planet for the leatherback sea turtle, an animal that has been crossing oceans and laying eggs on the same beaches for over 100 million years. The bay's waters contain some of the most pristine coral reefs in the region. The Galathea River, flowing through ancient rainforest before reaching the sea, sustains a food web that ecologists describe as irreplaceable. The surrounding jungle is home to 648 recorded plant species, 330 documented species of fauna, including animals found nowhere else on Earth, and, as of 2026, at least one species of bird not yet formally named by science. India's own environmental impact assessment admitted the effects on endemic flora and fauna are mostly unknown. Yet the government approved clearing approximately 964,000 trees inside a UNESCO biosphere reserve. The environmental clearance was granted in November 2022, after a process that critics, including environmental lawyers, say was systematically rushed. Maps prepared in 2020 showed coral reefs inside the proposed port zone. Updated maps released in 2021 conveniently showed those reefs further offshore. Independent scientists say the revised maps are inaccurate. There's also evidence that turtle hatchery infrastructure at the project site has been quietly removed, possibly to make the site appear less ecologically sensitive. Experts suggest this is an attempt to shift nesting patterns away from Galathea Bay. But leatherbacks don't just move. Science tells us they return to the same beaches based on long-term ecological memory. You can't relocate 100 million years of instinct. And then there's the seismic question, the one that to me is the most astonishing part of this story. Great Nicobar Island sits directly atop a major active fault line. On December 26, 2004, an earthquake centered roughly 150 kilometers away triggered the Indian Ocean tsunami, one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history, killing 230,000 people across 9 countries. On that same day, Great Nicobar's southern tip sank about 5 meters into the ocean, permanently. Most of its coastal settlements were obliterated. In July 2025, a geologist warned that an ongoing cluster of smaller earthquakes near the Nicobar Islands could signal volcanic activity in the Andaman Sea. India is proposing to build $10 billion of critical infrastructure, a major port, an international airport, a power plant, on ground that literally subsided by 5 meters during living memory. And the environmental impact assessment contains, according to independent reviewers, no comprehensive disaster risk assessment. And yet, none of that addresses the people who are already living there. The Shompen are among the most isolated peoples on Earth. There are roughly 300 of them, some estimates say fewer. Around 2/3 have never had meaningful contact with the outside world. They live as nomadic hunter-gatherers in the rainforest interior of Great Nicobar, moving between forest camps, subsisting on what the jungle provides. Their languages have never been fully translated, and their territorial boundaries are defined not by maps, but by the rivers they follow. In 1956, the Indian government formally designated the entire island a tribal reserve, carved out specifically and exclusively for the Shompen and the coastal Nicobarese people. The project would require removing protection from 84 square kilometers of that reserve. In 2024, 39 genocide scholars from 13 countries, including historians, sociologists, and the former president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, wrote an open letter to India's president. They described the project as a death sentence for the Shompen, tantamount to the international crime of genocide. Their reasoning was precise. The tribe has little to no immunity to common infectious diseases. Simple contact with an influx of settlers, construction workers, port operators, civil servants would, in their assessment, cause a precipitous population collapse. The tribe would not be killed directly. They would be killed by exposure, by the diseases that the rest of us carry without thinking about it. India's own project documents acknowledge this risk explicitly. The vision document states, and I am reading directly, "Once infections spread, the whole community may face extinction." The government's proposed solution? Geofencing, surveillance towers, to monitor movements and keep them separated from the incoming population. A former member of the island's Tribal Welfare Committee, speaking anonymously, told journalists, "Geofencing these areas violates the tribe's right to free movement." The Shompen policy of 2015 also shows that several habitations lie directly within the proposed power plant zone, all the way to Indira Point. Here is the contradiction at the heart of this project. The same Indian government that arrested an American influencer in March 2025 for attempting to make illegal contact with the Sentinelese people on North Sentinel Island, rightly, is simultaneously planning to build a city of 350,000 people on the island next door. The law that protects isolated tribes apparently has a clause for national development. I want to be honest about the other side of this argument, because it's not nothing. India does have legitimate reasons for the project. It currently relies heavily on foreign ports like Colombo and Singapore. India also has a strong case here. China's ports and the Malacca dilemma expose genuine maritime vulnerabilities. Prime Minister Modi has described this as a project of strategic defence and national importance. His Environment Minister insists there is no harm to local species and no threat to the island's tribal communities. The government points to 42 environmental compliance conditions attached to the clearance and to plans for compensatory afforestation. Though critics note the afforestation is proposed in the state of Haryana, thousands of kilometres away. You cannot compensate for a leatherback nesting beach by planting trees in a landlocked state 3,000 kilometres away. But that's what the paperwork says. Independent shipping analysts, however, are notably less enthusiastic about the commercial projections. The first phase of the port isn't expected until 2028. Full development is projected for 2058, and as of today, no major international port operator has formally committed any investment. The entire first phase is government-funded. Here's my honest read. The geopolitical chess move makes sense, and India's geographic advantage here is undeniable. But the process has been compromised. Environmental assessments were rushed. Indigenous consultation was insufficient or entirely absent. And the decision to proceed in an area the government's own documents describe as ecologically mostly unknown is not a calculated risk. It's a deliberate gamble made by people who will not be living with the consequences. If this project succeeds, India will have permanently altered the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. Every Chinese naval movement through the 6-degree channel will be watched, catalogued, and potentially interdicted. India will hold leverage it has never possessed in modern history. That matters. If it fails, if the seismic risk materializes, or if the economics never deliver, India will have spent billions of dollars destroying one of the last intact tropical ecosystems in the Indian Ocean, for absolutely nothing. And somewhere in that outcome, there are around 300 people who cannot participate in this conversation, who have no embassy, no legal team, and no social media campaign. They live in the forest of an island that 2 megapowers are using as a piece on a board they have never seen. Uncovering these hidden layers of global infrastructure and geopolitics is exactly what we do here. If you want to understand the deeper forces reshaping our world, consider subscribing to Design Zip. We don't skim the surface. Because stories like Great Nicobar leave us with one incredibly uncomfortable truth. The strategic logic is understandable. The human and ecological cost is real. And we live in a world where those two realities are allowed to coexist without resolution, where a government can acknowledge in its own text that an entire people may face extinction and proceed anyway, because geopolitics doesn't wait. So the question this project leaves behind is simple. If the price of national security is the extinction of a people who chose to live outside of history, is that a price we accept? Or is it a price we've simply stopped calculating?